Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. Today is Monday, December 13th, 2021, and I'm the host of the show, Cara Santamaria, and we've got a fascinating show for you today, an important show for you today. But before we dive into that, let's talk about some other important stuff, namely how grateful I am for the support of all of you. I'm grateful for you for listening. I'm grateful for you for sharing this little show, that I've been doing now for 7 years. Is that right? Wow. And for, sharing it with your friends and your family and across social media. I'm also grateful for those of you who support the show in the several different ways that you can. Of course, you can always rate and review on whatever podcast app you listen to the show, where you listen to the show. You can also shop in the Talk Nerdy store by visiting talknerdymerch.com. And kind of the easiest way and a very fruitful way is to visit patreon.com/talknerdy and pledge your support. And there, if you pledge as little as $2, you will get access to an ad-free version of the show. But right now, I want to thank my top tier pledgers, and I'm going to start with the coolest people in the universe. And they, of course, include Daniel Lang, Mary Neva, and Rob Schreck. I also want to thank the coolest people in the galaxy. They include Brian Holden, Christopher Pitts, David J.E. Smith, Dudis Infinitus, Gabrielle F. Jaramillo Gonzalez, June Sapara, and Ulrika Hagman. Thank you all so much once again from the bottom of my heart. You are the reason I'm able to keep pressing on with this labor of love. All right, business is behind us. Let's dive into the show. Okay, so I had the opportunity to talk to Dr. Talya Miron-Shatz. She has a new book, Your Life Depends on It, What You Can Do to Make Better Choices About Your Health. So a little bit more about Talya. She is a senior fellow at the Center for Medicine in the Public Interest in New York, a professor at Ono Academic College in Israel, and a visiting researcher at the University of Cambridge. She also studied, she'll mention in the show, under Dr. Daniel Kahneman. She studied as a psychologist. Oftentimes her field is now referred to as behavioral economics. And we talk a lot about navigating healthcare in modern society, being in that position as the patient, advocating for oneself, knowing what questions to ask, knowing how to really take charge of your own health and gosh, how to make good decisions. It's not always easy to do. So without any further ado, here she is, Dr. Talya Miron-Shatz. Well, Talya, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Cara. I'm super excited.
Me too. So, okay, we are connecting from kind of across the globe right now. Am I right? Are you in Jerusalem right now?
I am indeed. Yes.
And I'm all the way over in Los Angeles. So we're recording this in the middle of the week. It's about noon-ish my time. It's late at night for you then.
It is. I'm a trooper, though,
You are. And thank you so much for even after a long day, taking the time to enlighten us about your new book. I'm so excited to talk about Your Life Depends on It. I think navigating healthcare, empowering personal decisions, it's such an important topic. And we were chatting a little bit before I started recording, but it's something that's become more salient to me personally. I mean, it's salient to everybody because everybody's going to have to navigate the healthcare system at some point in their lives. But it's become even more salient to me lately as I'm working in psychotherapy. I specifically do therapy within a large cancer ward in Los Angeles. And so a big part of what I do in sessions is work with patients who are either early diagnosed or they're in active treatment or they're in survivorship or they're facing end of life. We work, not every patient, but for many patients, one of the big themes is decision making, communicating with healthcare providers, feeling like they're in the driver's seat or sometimes not wanting to know things like prognosis. And so when your book came across my desk, I got very excited because not only am I a skeptic, not only am I kind of working in health psychology now, but there's so many just reasons that I think this is meaningful to me, but meaningful to literally every single person on the planet.
So I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm totally fascinated. I'll be interviewing you for my next book. Have no doubt, because it's going to be about the emotional aspects of being a patient. And yes, so for sure we'll be talking. Interestingly enough, because this has been a long day and a wonderful one too. I just had a book event courtesy of Zoom in Utah, in Salt Lake City. And I was in conversation with Dr. Angie Fagerlin from University of Utah. And she's a big name in medical decision making. And we were talking about how to make the decisions. So how do we make them? Meaning based on what type of information, how much do we understand, how is it presented to us, but also to what degree do we want to be involved? Like, do we want to be in the driver's seat or not? And interestingly enough, she gave a wonderful example. She said she has 3 boys, and the first time one of them hit their face, she was, beside herself. The second time, the third, the fourth, and the fifth, yeah, she showed up at the ER. She told the doctor, "I want minimum pain and minimum scars." Now that's it. Like she did not ask for more information, and she, is super well equipped. She's a department chair at the Faculty of Medicine, but she didn't want to know. She said, "I'm covered in my kids' blood. They're in pain. I don't want to know. I don't need to know." And I totally understand that, and I totally respect that. I think this is something we need to keep in mind, that we have a right to be as involved as we want to be, which means we can be very involved, not involved at all, or anything in the middle.
Yeah, it's true. And I hope we come back around to it, because I want to kind of get some background first, but eventually I'm making a note for myself that I want to talk a little bit about sort of the historical paternalistic system and how we've sort of moved away from that and some of the changes that have come. But before we kind of dive deep into navigating the healthcare system, I would love to know, how it is that you came to write this book. You obviously have had a really rich career, and this book has a very sort of multidisciplinary approach to it. So tell me sort of, not only why is this topic interesting to you and how did you get there, but what was your academic and career path as well?
Wow, I'm so glad you asked. So, how did I get there? Is by chance, of course. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology. I have a master's degree in organizational psychology and a PhD in decision making. In fact, I have a very strong background in decision making. I did my postdoctoral work at Princeton University with Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman. So I have that under my belt.
Yeah. So
Um,
decision making, is that sort of, is it in the school of psychology or is it economics? Is it sort of a hybrid between the two?
it's all about being sexy. That's the most important thing in so many domains. So for real, it's psychology. Kahneman is a psychologist. Tversky was a psychologist. Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in economics. He never took an econ class in his life. He's not an economist, but what he did really revolutionized economics. And he's a psychologist. So that's psychology, but behavioral economics sounds ever so much sexier than just social psych. I kid you not. It's like, oh, behavioral economics. Ooh, that's great. And obviously some people do come from economics and study that, but the foundation of it is psychology. It's how do we think? How do we make decisions? How do we choose? Do we even like to choose? So that's like the grand scheme of where I come from academically. So how did I get to do medical decision making? It's completely by chance. I was a grad student and I was invited to teach genetic counseling students, to teach them a class. Yeah, that's at the School of Medicine, to teach them a class on the psychological aspects of medical decision making. And
Oh,
that was
which is
really
huge, because genetic counselors are basically working with frightened, overwhelmed, stressed out would-be parents to help them make decisions about
exactly.
parenthood, about whether or not they want to roll the dice with their genes.
Exactly. with parents and with would-be oncology patients. So,
Right. Oh, you're
you
right. Yeah,
know,
that's a huge part of it too. Yeah. What is your likelihood of developing cancer?
of course, and none of this is stress-free, absolutely. And I think you're going to find it hard to believe that my class was the only class they were taught on how do people process information. What happens when you give them this information that you worked so hard to calculate? How do people just make heads or tails of it? And I sat in on a consultation because I said, I already have 3 kids. I never had genetic counseling. I want to see what it looks like. And that was a majorly eye-opening experience because I saw a very good genetic counselor who was smart, knowledgeable, and compassionate and patient, like everything you would hope for.
Yeah.
And seriously, I'm still friends with her. I mean, that's how much I admire her. And across the table from her sit a couple, and the lady is pregnant and they have a little girl running around, and they can't hear well or at all really, and they have an interpreter with them. So it's a small room. It's very crowded, and then it gets crowded with chromosomes and genes and with people trying to understand what that really good professional is talking about. And that just blew my mind. I mean, I think I realized that there's such a gap between medical knowledge and the people receiving it. So slowly, it just hijacked my life, basically. So I started writing paper after paper on medical decision making. And that was my career for a long time. Now, you mentioned that the book is multidisciplinary, and that's right, because after writing over 60 academic papers, I said, this is great, but A, I don't feel like I'm making a difference. Like my daughter, she's sassy. She always says, "Mom, nobody reads your papers." And that's really not entirely true, but it is true that not many people approach the papers. I mean, you have wonderful listeners, loyal listeners, intelligent listeners to your podcast, but how often do they just read an academic paper? I don't know,
Right. It's
right? So
probably just other academics, right? It's sort of the people that are often either studying medical decision making or the people that are guiding decision making in their patients, but it's not the patients that are probably reading these things.
exactly, exactly. So I wanted to write something that's more approachable. And I also felt that I wanted to write something that will be, first of all, fun, like that I can go a little crazy in, that I can bring in my personality and my quirks and the books I love and poems and talk about sociology and talk about just the world and how we view it and just bring in fascinating things. Like I have a friend from the Vatican. I know it sounds over the top, but I was at a conference and there was someone from the Vatican, pretty high ranking there. Um, and we talked about end of life. And he said, of course. He emailed me. He said, this is just like the Ars Moriendi. I'm like, what the heck is Ars Moriendi? And apparently, like there's Ars Poetic and there was Ars. Ars is just the art of, the practice of, and there was the practice of dying. Like, how does one die? Because when there was a plague, not the COVID, but one in the 15th century, a lot of clergymen died because they just caught it. And then they had to write a book helping friends and relatives be with the person who was about to finish their life. And obviously, it was all about religion, but it was a practice of saying, let's talk about death. This is happening. Let's have a conversation about it. And my friend from the Vatican mentioned it, and I thought we need a modern Ars Moriendi. It's not all about the salvation and Jesus Christ, etc. For some people, it still is. For some people, it is less. It resonates less with them. And let's see what we're doing. Let's see how people can talk about death. And that's in fact something else that I wrote about, like how to engage with that, how to make a conversation, how to make decisions about it. So that's the type of things that I got very involved into, very interested in. That I really wanted, I don't know, I wanted to write something that people would read and they would say, oh my God, She understands. It's hard. It's just really hard for me to be in the patient's seat. It's difficult. And she's telling me why it's difficult and gives me some tools to make it better.
And that's such an important aspect of the book, is that not only does it really situate the problem, right? What are some of the barriers to access? What are some of the reasons that medical decision making is so overwhelming, so difficult, so frustrating, all of the above. But then it also is quite actionable. It really does help individuals with some tools, as you mentioned, to better navigate a lot of this personal decision making. So I sort of do want to cover both bases. But one of the things, before we even dive into that must be, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say it must be frustrating, but it's just a thought that crossed my mind, is that very often in life we don't think about this stuff until we have to think about it. And I'm wondering, I can imagine that many of the people who are picking up your book are facing difficult times, and they want help with that navigation. But I'm also wondering how beneficial it would be, right? How protective it would be, if we talked about this stuff before it was relevant to us. If we sort of talked about medical decision making, even like you said, end of life issues. And obviously, maybe I'm a little biased here because I orient in existential psychology, but I very much think that thinking about death is very protective of fear of death later in life.
Mm-hmm. Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I really tried to position the book as something that you just have to read because you're smart, because you want to understand how the world works. And when we were talking before the show started, you mentioned cosmology, and that's great, right? So you want to understand the stars in the universe. But you should also understand how you make decisions about your health. I think it's fascinating, and it's also helpful. I want to say something else about who it's beneficial for. So it's obviously very beneficial for patients, but I felt that if I left it at beneficial for patients, I would be I would be pretending. I would be pretending like it's all on the patient, and it is totally not. You can be the smartest patient in the world. First of all, sometimes we're in pain, we're overwhelmed, we're confused, we're anxious, and we need help. Even if we are the smartest person in the world, which we don't have to be, we are just a person, right? We're entitled to still get good care and understand what's happening to us. But if I just say, well, it's on you, then I'm pretending like you're in it alone, and you're not, and I'm not. We're all in it in this conversation with a physician. And physicians, I'm sure they go into medicine because they want to help people. They want to connect with people. They want to communicate with people and heal them. And they need tools as well in order to communicate better with patients. And then eventually I realized, but wait, it's like there's another layer. This conversation takes place in a medical organization that allocates time for the medical encounter. Like we all complain that my doctor didn't have enough time for me. That's very common. Now, it's not because your doctor is just evil. It's because that's how their schedule is structured. So is there enough time? Is there a practice in which when you come in, the doctor says, "Oh, hi, Cara," or "Hello, Ms. What can I do for you? My name is Dr. X. What can I do for you today?" And it doesn't take a long time, but they've established that you're a person and they're a person too, and that they're here for you. And that's huge.
Oh, for sure. So it's so funny because when you train as a psychotherapist, right? When you train in clinical psychology, a big part of your training is this well, and especially a big part of my training because I trained within an existential humanistic orientation. But a big part of the training is this very person-centered approach. So everything from, you never sit higher than a client or a patient. You always want to be quite like at eye level. obviously repeating somebody's name multiple times kind of, and also you have the benefit in psychotherapy that I see my patients for an hour a week every week, and some of them only see their oncologist for 20 minutes every month. And so I have intimate knowledge of their fears, their concerns, their worries, that maybe their oncologists don't. And it is worrisome that I had inordinate training in how to navigate these things. And very often when I talk to my friends, because I have a lot of friends who work in the medical profession as well, they're like, oh, I've never taken a class on how to break bad news to somebody. I've never been really trained on how to help somebody navigate a decision or tell them, what their options are. And sometimes when you talk to oncologists, and, not for nothing, I'm sure that they have their reasons before it. I've heard oncologists tell me outright, oh, I don't prognosticate unless somebody advocates for it. So I don't tell people anything about their prognosis. And I'm like, that's fair. You want to know that somebody wants that information. But at the same time, I can't tell you how often my patients are completely in the dark when I first meet with them. They have no idea what type of cancer they have, what their staging is, how survivable it is, how much time they potentially have. They have no idea if they're in dire straits or if they have years and years and years. And it's mind-boggling to me.
I could not agree with you more. I just could not. I know this happens around end of life conversations, which don't occur
Yeah, that's
because,
probably the worst of it is the end of life
yeah,
talks.
yeah,
Yeah.
doctors
Even
avoid
in
them like the
onc.
plague, even in onc,
Yeah,
even in
they
oncology.
do.
Yes.
And one of the biggest things that I kind of bring to my patients is that, everybody has a job to do and everybody's trained in a very specific modality. And very often, every so often I have a patient who has an incredible oncologist who navigates all of these decisions with them and is really supportive even after they choose to stop treatment and move kind of into a hospice setting. But very often it's like, well, you're no longer my patient because there's no more cancer to fight. And it's like, and working with helping a patient understand, that their doctor is also a human being who has spent a lot of time fighting cancer. And that's what they know. And that's sort of their wheelhouse. And, everybody has a job to do. That's really hard too, because, we wish that every physician was also a therapist, was also a chaplain, was also all of these things. But some are better than others at that.
I think they cannot be chaplains or therapists, but they can and should understand the relational role and in their care. And there are three things I want to say about that. So the first one is there are studies showing that when you feel your doctor cares about you as a person and you're an HIV person and you're an HIV patient, you are more likely to take your medication than when you don't feel that your doctor cares about you as a person. Now you can say, but wait, these are HIV patients. They really need to take their medication. The answer is yes. They really need to take their medication, but they're less likely to do that if they feel the doctor doesn't care. So actually having a doctor that you feel cares about you is crucial to your health, not just to your emotions. The other thing I want to say is anecdotal, and I heard it in a talk by the wonderful and phenomenal MacArthur Prize winner, Dr. Diane Mayer of Mount Sinai. She really created the palliative care approach and is bringing it to the world. And she gave this amazing talk. She spoke about a cancer patient who decided to quit treatment, and she was really, really sad that her doctor didn't come visit her. Like she was basically dying. She was really sad. And Dr. Mayer spoke to the oncologist, and he said, I'm devastated that she's dying and I feel like I failed her. How can I go see her when I failed her? And the truth is, your your listeners, if you guys are faint of heart, then please don't listen. But the truth is that we're all going to die one day, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
she was an oncology patient, and poor thing, she was dying. And what she wanted was for her oncologist to come and be with her. And eventually he did. And he didn't have to do anything. he was there, that meant a lot, because that meant that he had cared about her. That was huge.
Right. It shows that you can take a sort of a slice of an experience, and the phenomenology of that experience can be vastly different depending on who you are, how you are positioned in the world, what your relational, stance is. So, these are two people who have had a dyad. They've had a relationship for probably years, and they see an act of not coming to visit or an act of moving into ceasing treatment so vastly differently. Because, of
Yes.
course, the patient
Yes.
doesn't think of the oncologist as having failed. They think of the cancer as having been too strong. It's like there's a certain point where there's no more meds and this is it. This is end of life. But the oncologist is like, I didn't do my job.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's fascinating because I think part of a doctor's job is not to be a chaplain and not to be a therapist, and it's fine if they're not, just to be a person and relate to the patient. So a while ago, I did a study on thank you letters to physicians, which patients tend to write, and sometimes doctors frame them. So I looked at 100 such letters that medical centers posted on their websites. And I was like curious, so what do people thank their doctor for? Apparently, patients are as likely to thank the doctor for their care as they are for the doctor's personality and demeanor. Now, with personality and demeanor, it's very, very specific. They will say, Dr. X was so great. She explained everything to me, or she came with me to the mammogram. She held my hand. She didn't have to. I really appreciated that. Or Abdul, the nurse, always comes and gets me from the waiting room. That's so nice of him. Like the minutia of this interaction, of this person cares for me. And you know how they write about medical care? They will say, I had great care, or I had good
Right,
care,
right. Did their job. Yeah, exactly.
Go team, it's like, I, I don't know. It's like, whatever.
Right,
They
because
fix, they
what's the
fixed me.
benchmark there? Yeah, exactly. They followed the standard of care. I don't know what the standard of care
Don't
is. They did their
exactly.
job.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like they gave me medicine. Is it the best medicine? I don't have a control group, right? Or maybe I don't even
Right.
have the scientific training to think of a control group. So great care or good care. And when I wrote the book, I was thinking I want to help make medical decision making better, make how people feel around these things better. And I thought, but wait, I can't just convince healthcare executives this is important because people will feel better. It's like a wishy-washy goal, who cares? Someone should make nice to patients. Yeah, whatever. I don't have the time or money. So I
Right.
made a
They want to
point
see
of
the ROI on that.
exactly. And I showed them
Yeah.
and I showed
Yeah.
them. It's like I made a point of saying, like I gave an example of a healthcare system from Utah actually, and I was just interviewed in Utah. So that was kind of funny. The
Oh,
interviewer
yeah.
was so excited that I was like rooting for them. And rightly so. There's a great paper that was about what they did, and they really turned their healthcare system around. They made it much more patient centered. They made sure that patients are satisfied, their doctors are satisfied, so there's less burnout and there's fewer lawsuits, and patients are happy, and ratings are higher, and income is higher. So basically, everyone wins, but that was a major cultural shift. But when you make that happen, you win. You, as a medical organization, you actually win because of all these reasons, because of all these things that we sometimes think are unavoidable. And in fact, we became aware of them. And it's interesting. You said you became much more aware of medical decision making recently because you work in an oncology department. And as I said, I love, love, love to hear much more of this. And I will, you know, be be warned. You're going to be
Yeah.
hearing
No, of
from me.
course. Of course.
Wonderful. But I was surprised because I thought that you, like the rest of the world, have become more aware of medical decision making because of COVID.
Oh,
because
right.
it's just
Yeah.
front and center of our life. Determines, will someone's kid go to school today? Well, that depends on COVID. Will you
Ugh,
work from
yeah.
home? Have I been teaching via Zoom? What's Zoom?
Right. I'm doing
Years
all of my
ago,
therapy online right now.
it's so
Yeah.
funny. Yeah, but years
Yeah.
ago, people would say Zoom. You'd be like, what? You know,
Yeah, now it's shorthand. It's like just Google it. Let's just chat on Zoom, even if you mean on another platform
of
altogether.
course,
Yeah.
absolutely. So it completely determines what our life looks like, whether or not we travel, what our travel looks like, everything. And there are so many medical decisions and choices that we have to make. Do we vaccinate? Hello, big controversy. What do we do? Do we mask? Do we not mask? Do we wash our hands? What's happening? What's going on? We are making medical decisions all the time. We always do. You wake up in the morning and you brush your teeth. One hopes, right? That's a medical decision.
Yeah.
Maybe people don't
Hmm.
brush their teeth. Another medical decision, or not pick up their prescription drug, or decide they only have to take it in the morning, even though the doctor said morning and evening, or not exercise. That's a health decision, but it will lead into medical decisions. And with medical decision making around COVID, we really are seeing so many of the things that were always there. Now they're front and center, like the fact that when something has low probability, we just tend to dismiss it. And that's what happened in the beginning with COVID. It was a low probability event. Very few
Oh,
people were
yeah.
dying of COVID. It was like, oh yeah, whatever, this weird thing, let's just ignore it. It's not happening. It is happening. And I thought that's such a wonderful opportunity for people to learn. You have a health problem and it's small. Well, guess what? Take care of it while it's small. Like, don't ignore it and wait for it to grow bigger, because then it's going to be much harder to deal with. Right. So that's like one major lesson you would think people would learn. Um, but the truth is, we don't like to think about difficult things, and we like things to be simple. We like to have certainty in our life. And the sad fact is that there is very little certainty in life, and life isn't all that simple. So, in our minds, we like to simplify things. We like to think, for example, of treatments as, oh, this gives me hope. So, this is great and I should do it. And one of the things that I write about is probabilities. And so it's like, what a snooze word. Who cares about probabilities? So,
Oh, gosh. And we're so bad at them. We're so bad at analyzing risk and understanding probability.
absolutely. But we must. What do we do?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
you work in oncology. So, I'll give you an example from oncology. Women who have had a mastectomy, who've had their breasts removed because of breast cancer, can have follow up treatments. And one such follow up treatment is chemotherapy. So this woman receives chemotherapy for breast cancer, and it wreaks havoc in her body and mostly in her mind. And she's just miserable. And her daughter says, Mom, I don't even recognize you. It's happening. And it's just really not good. But that woman keeps taking it because she says, it's saving my life. How can I not take it? And then she stumbles upon something that was created in Cambridge by the center where I'm a visiting researcher. And it's called NHS Predict. And I'm mentioning it because it's freely available online, NHS Predict. And in it, women who have had breast cancer can punch in their numbers, their age, their tumor size, all these things that they know in their sleep. So this woman punches in her numbers just to see, what's what's the added value of chemotherapy. She finds that out of 100 women like her, four, only four, will have added benefit from taking chemotherapy. Exactly. So I said only four, and that's not fair because she can say, okay, four women will have added benefit. I'm going to take it. What she said was, what? 4 out of 100? Yeah, I probably got this wrong. I'll go show my oncologist. She goes to see her oncologist. They open up NHS Predict. They punch in the numbers, and she wasn't wrong. It's for women. And you could say it's 4%, but when you present it in women, it's like a frequentist way of presenting. 4 out of every 100 women like you. It's like, what? Only 4? Is it worth it for me? And that's a question that it's very legitimate for a patient to ask. Is it worth it for me, right? And we were talking a little bit about personalized medicine and patient-centered medicine. And patient-centered is also, I want to do everything to prevent cancer, regardless of how it makes me feel, or my quality of life matters more to me. And given that chemo is not giving me a huge benefit, I would rather not do it. And
And sadly,
nobody,
very few people know until they've actually experienced those things.
yes, yes, and
And
I hope
so,
nobody ever experiences it. But when you do, you what you deserve to have are clear numbers that you understand and the opportunity to decide. And then you can either say, I want it or I don't want it, or I need some more information or help me decide. All of the above. They are all incredibly legit.
absolutely. And I've seen this, I've worked with so many patients now that I've seen this kind of anecdotally from multiple angles. Like, for example, I've seen patients who were not ready, who had a lot of denial around death, who hadn't processed death, who were really, not ready, who were so sick and and no chance, but continued to sort of torture themselves with radiation until the day that they died, even though it was not only was it not helping the fight, it was not even alleviating pain. It wasn't palliative radiation, it was contributing to pain. Yet, continued to do that until the day they died. And then I've seen other patients who basically, a good example, I was actually talking to a patient recently who was saying, I'm really scared that there's going to be that day where the doctor says there's nothing left we can do. And, my response was, it could happen, but I can tell you from experience that more often there's always something else to try. Yet the patient finally says, I don't want to do more. I'm done. Like, there's that point where you go, okay, there's this new thing we could try, but do the risks outweigh the benefits? Does the pain outweigh the life extension? And ultimately, not always, but very often, there's always something else you could do. But the question is it worth it? Do you want to? And very often, that's the point when somebody says, no more. No more. I need to focus on quality of life. Very often the decision is not made for them. Sometimes it is, right? Medically, there's just nothing else available. But even in those cases, I've seen patients go back to first line treatment. So, very often it's like, at what point is this worth, what am I going to get 3 extra months out of this? And I'm going to be like, I remember seeing a patient years ago in a neuropsych clinic, not a person struggling with cancer, but a person who had AIDS. And I was doing a suicidality assessment and, asked about ideation and all the things that you have to ask about. And this patient said, I'm not suicidal, but I did stop taking my medication. So I guess, you could identify that as such. And I was like, okay, tell me about that. And they were like, I'm dying and I don't want to spend my final days on the toilet. I just can't. So at a certain point, I decided I'm not doing it anymore. And what a powerful personal decision that very often is not brought into the conversation.
I think because a lot of people really walk away from talking about death, I want to give your listeners a tool that they can always use. I was going to say dead or alive. So
Right. Yeah.
probably that's overly optimistic, but here it is. Um, so when your doctor offers you something, and that can be cancer treatment for our final days, or just blood pressure medication, or flossing, anything. 3 good questions to ask. I ask about what matters. The first one is, what are the risks? You want to know, what's it going to do to me, right? You deserve to know. And I say that because we sometimes like to simplify reality and we focus on the benefit, but benefit is the second question. It's not the first one. We hear benefit, we're like, yeah, count me in. Let's start with the risks.
And you're right. Like, tell me if I'm wrong, but I feel like I've read literature that shows that, especially like in emergency situations, that physicians tend to downplay risks and play up benefits when they describe, like, they're legally required to describe risks and benefits prior to surgery, for example. And even though it's all written there in plain text, they might be like, yeah, okay, there's bleeding, there's whatever. But there's a good chance that you'll blah, 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 but they don't always match the numbers. It's like a cognitive bias. They tend to minimize the risk and maximize the benefit.
I think they're walking a fine line. I really don't envy them. I really salute every single doctor on the face of the earth because they want to instill hope. But for us to make good decisions, we can't just base them on hope or it's going to be great or it's going to be fine. We deserve to know what are the risks. And like for real, because we all know that when you read a medication brochure, it's like 20,000 terrible things that could happen to you, even
Oh, I
if you're
see
just
this
taking
all
something
the
for
time with my
headache.
patients. Yeah, my
I'll
patients are always like,
bet.
"Oh my god, this chemotherapy is going to do this, this, this," and I'm like, "No, no, no. The FDA is required to list everything that has ever happened to anybody. There's not a single person on the planet who had all those things at the same
No, for sure.
time."
For
Yeah.
sure. So what are the risks, and also how likely are they to happen? What are the benefits? And also, how likely are they to happen? Because the example I gave of that woman with the 4% shows that the benefits are not very likely. And then there's an amazing question, and that's the question of what are the alternatives? Whoa, doctors have their mind set on a course of action, of treatment. When you ask about alternatives, you get different answers. You hear things that they didn't tell you up until now. They don't want to lie to you, and they don't lie to you, but maybe they don't give you the whole picture, just their favorite part of the picture. And yet, when you ask, what are the alternatives? They can't say, oh, there aren't any. Maybe there aren't any, but that's probably rare. The examples you gave of patients who are really at the end of the line, what are the alternatives? Well, palliative care could be an alternative. It's not like there's nothing we can do. We can
When
ease the
even in end
pain.
of life, I see that a lot. Like, I don't want to go on like this. Well, you can stop eating or drinking. You can receive palliative sedation. I live in California. We have medical aid in dying. That's what I'm doing my dissertation on, is the experience of people who have opted for medical aid in dying. Even in death, there are massive decisions that can be made.
Of course. Of course. And I want to go back to something you said, and it's something that's killing me in the
Mm.
context of language and it, around cancer in particular. I think it's only around cancer. I might be wrong. The rhetoric oftentimes is to battle cancer, to fight cancer,
Oh yeah.
or
Yeah, so often.
my pet
Lost the
peeve,
battle, lost the war. Yeah.
lost the battle. I'm like, oh, they're dead and a loser. Way to
Right.
go.
Yeah. And this
You
idea of
know?
that the survivors just like they had something intrinsic to their will that allowed them to live. And
Yes.
then the other, yeah, it's
Yes.
really problematic, the language that we use around
Yes.
cancer.
I think it bothers me because I think people are entitled to their emotions. They're
Hmm.
entitled to feel that cancer is the biggest gift they ever got, or that cancer just totally sucks, and
Totally.
that they want to fight, or that they're tired, and it
And they're
hurts.
entitled to their identities around the disease. And that's something in my very first consult when I meet with people, I ask them, what does cancer mean to you? How do you identify? And I learn a lot about patients. Some of them are wearing ribbons every day and doing every 5K, and other ones are like, nobody knows I have cancer. I don't identify as a cancer patient. I don't like the word cancer. And it's everything in between. And knowing that is central to knowing how to give that sort of person-centered therapy.
That's right. That is incredibly true. That is very, very true. And it relates to very deep issues around people's identity. I think one of the things that I've learned, and I've learned it through research, I've also learned it through working with the healthcare industry, with app developers, with programmers, with corporates that are building things to help people adhere to medication, etc. And it's how deep the issues go. So I'll give you an example where you would not think there's an emotional component at all. And that's a company approached me and they were building a model to replace existing HMOs, something that's more like a credit card. just to simplify that. And they showed me their mock-ups, like what they wanted it to look like. And I said, you do realize that you are not creating any mechanisms to increase trust or to create trust. And then you're asking people for their credit card info. Why would they give it to you? Who are you? Are you a scam? Like, should they trust you at all? And then if they don't put in the credit card info, then the card is moot. So the person goes to the doctor's office and the office will say, your card's not working. So that's just bad all around. So you need to understand what are the psychological drivers of behavior. And that's, in a place where you would say, this is just merely procedural, but it never is only procedural. And then
Oh,
there's
of course
adherence to
not. And we know that at
medication.
the grocery store, right? Like we know that gosh, the where the products are on the shelf, what the pricing looks like, what the packaging looks like, how many options there are. All of that was a very specific decision that was made by people who get paid money to make those decisions in an
For
effort to try to
sure.
get you to pick their product.
For sure. To think that it's cheap, even though it's not really, or whatever. And that's really crucial. And, when it comes to groceries, that's one thing. Sometimes it comes to adherence to medication, where which stands at about 50% of some people will never pick up their prescription. They leave the doctor's office with a prescription, which they don't pick up. And other people do pick it up, but they don't fully adhere. So when you're creating a system, an online, a digital system, an app, whatever it is, to get people to adhere, you need to understand, why are they not adhering? If you make the mistake of thinking it's just a reminder, then you might help 10% of the people, but you're definitely not helping everyone all the time, because these things touch upon issues that you mentioned of identity. Am I now a sick person? That's very deep. Are you telling me that I'm not invincible and I'm going to not be invincible for the rest of my life with this stupid pill I have to take? What the heck? Get out of here. I don't want to see you, and I don't want to see the stupid pill. And you give them a reminder. Are you solving their problem? I don't think so. So
You're
we
right. So
really,
often these decisions are, it's like people will design these mechanisms based on their own experience. So you're right. There will be this assumption, well, the reason people aren't taking their meds is because they forgot. Okay, you're right. A certain percentage of people are forgetting, but some people can't afford their medication. Some people need more education around their medication. Some people have emotional reasons that they're not taking their medication. And until you, I think, do your damn job and research why people aren't doing this and who are these people, what communities do they come from, are they women, are they men, are they trans, are they black, are they Latinx, are they white, all of those kind of cultural features play in too. And that's a part we haven't even brushed. Is earlier you mentioned there's the patient, there's the provider, and there's the system. And so often I see the ravages of the system that, I think Angela Saini did a great job. I had her on the podcast years ago talking about, in her books, Inferior and Superior, talking about the ways that sort of the structure of science and medicine have systematically minimized women's voices, have systematically minimized minority voices. And it's almost like I actually had a patient just recently tell me in session, sometimes I feel like when I'm battling the insurance company, they intentionally make it hard so that a certain percentage of people will just give up.
the higher
Like
the
it's
better.
like, yeah, exactly.
Of course.
Exactly. That there's an intentional barrier to entry simply so that they don't have to bother reimbursing a handful of people.
I think that's probably true. But I want to go back to the social barriers. I think that's very important, because when we talk about patient, what patient? Who is the patient? How educated is the patient? Does the patient feel comfortable to say, what is that you just said? I don't understand. Could you please explain it to me? Could you write it down for me? When I'm asking that, does my doctor now think I'm stupid? Or do they know I'm an intelligent person And I just don't understand this term. We mentioned cosmology before. I said, well, I'm an Aries. Like, that's all I know about cosmology. You can talk to me about cosmology and I won't know anything. If I have to do something about it, you'd better speak slowly, explain the terms, write them down so I can Google them at home. And that's crucial. Now, people with lower social standing may feel that they're just being ignorant. And I also speak French, and in French, when you say j'ignorais, it's like I was ignorant of, and it's like I
Hmm.
didn't know. Well, I didn't
Right.
know. That's fine. I didn't
Yeah, there's a
know.
gap in my knowledge.
Precisely, which doesn't reflect poorly on me. It's just a fact that I did not know. So there you have it. And when someone doesn't feel that they have the self confidence to say, could you explain that? Then they're going to ask fewer questions and they're going to have poorer knowledge. That's really, really a shame. So it's on the medical system. Again, it's on the doctors to ask questions, to encourage
Yes.
the asking of questions.
And to understand their history with the subject, with the disease, with the experience. I can't tell you how often I see patients who say, "Oh, well, I don't want that surgery because, my uncle went in for that surgery and they never came out." Or you see this quite often in I think one of the most kind of blatant examples was in the early days of Ebola treatment in West Africa. You would see patients refusing to go to clinic, even though they had a positive or positive presumptive Ebola infection. I'm not going there. I'm not going with you. So and so went with you and they never came back. So there's a kind of a mix up of causality. And I think this is a common cognitive bias. We associate things. We have these associations that we make in our mind that we confuse correlation with causality. And so we say, well, this person got treatment. They felt fine until they went to the doctor, and then the doctor said you have a tumor, and then they started treatment, and then they were miserable, and then they died. But they were fine up until then because they don't see that, well, if we had just waited a little bit longer with no treatment, the cancer would have caught up to them as well.
Exactly. I think it comes, it has multiple reasons. And one of them is that we seek to have control. It's
Oh,
life is pretty
hugely.
awful when you don't have control over things. So you want to
It's a
have
mechanism I
control.
use in therapy. Like, I try to help people maintain and gain control in of course, healthy ways.
Of course. But sometimes it's so chaotic that, or you just don't understand that you think you can assume control in certain ways. And I recently heard of a 16-year-old kid, basically, who died of COVID. And his father said he was completely healthy up until a few days before. So we think we have control. People are saying, well, I'm not going to vaccinate. I'm healthy. I eat organic. It's all good. I have a strong immune system, whatever that means. Or I have an immune system. Well, everyone does. Hello. So that poor kid's father said, the poor father, bereft and grieving his son, said he was healthy. What does that mean? It means you had to take your healthy kid in to be vaccinated. And people are afraid of the side effects because then it will be on them. It's like, I caused this to my child. And they ignore the fact that by not protecting their child from COVID, they are exposing them, like actively exposing them to COVID risk. So we like to think that if the risk comes, we will handle it. But the truth is that when the risk comes, it's too late. And there's really nothing we can do about it.
It's it reminds me of I was talking about this on the other podcast I work on, The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, several weeks ago, maybe months ago now. We were talking about, cognitive biases and a lot of the ways that people make decisions and one of the sort of neuropsychological humility around our decision making errors. And one of the things that came up with was sort of this idea, and I'm sure there's a technical term for it, and I'm sure if there is, you know what it is, but this idea that um negative risk versus positive risk, or sort of like, if I do nothing, taking that risk seems lower than actively doing something. And just like you mentioned, oh, if I go get vaccinated, even though there is a risk, but it's like 0.0000001% of people will get Guillain-Barré or something like that. I'm actively doing something, so I'm initiating the risk. But if I just do nothing, I'm passive. I'm not an actor in this. So even if the risk of that is like, 90%, it doesn't feel like I am an actor in that process.
Yeah. You said the magic word, and the magic word is feel. So we're not calculating risk, we're feeling. And you're right, I do know the term. I was like, oh my God, what if I don't know it? But I do. And it's sins of omission versus sins of commission. So to omit something, to just not do something. So I didn't vaccinate my kid. Versus commission, like I vaccinated, I actively vaccinated my kid. So we
Yeah, and now I'm
pretend.
at fault if there is a negative consequence.
Exactly, but we pretend that we are not responsible of our omissions. Guess
But we're
what?
equally responsible.
We are
Yeah.
equally responsible, and they're going to catch up with us. Like that's just the reality of life. I mean, but
Yeah,
it's
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 true.
it feels different because going to vaccinate, and I'm just using it as an example because it's very vivid. Going to vaccinate is tangible. I'm gonna go to the clinic. There will be a syringe. That's what it's gonna look like. Whereas catching COVID is like, what does that look like? I don't know, right?
Right,
Because even
especially early on when
yeah,
you didn't know anybody, when you didn't see the images on television or on social media.
precisely.
Uh, it reminds me, I think you'll love this. You probably already have come across this, but earlier in the year, I was working for our local PBS station, and we were doing these like daily quick news hits in are affiliated with KPCC, which is our public radio station. And so I would interview all these different reporters on what they're following. And of course, COVID was a big topic. And one of our science reporters covered a quick story about how back then the Los Angeles Fire Department had
Yes.
low vaccine rates and they weren't doing great. So they said, you know what we're going to do? It was before mandates or anything like that. They said, okay, fine. You don't have to get vaccinated. It's your choice, but we are going to require that you go to the vaccine clinic and either get the jab or sign something that says you refuse. And just in requiring that the people go there, the vaccine rate went significantly up because of probably one of two things. Either they were seeing all their buddies just get the shot and they're like, I'm here already, I might as well. So either it's like, okay, I'm already here, I did half the legwork, or there was the peer pressure component, right? Everybody else is doing it. It seems I see them getting it done. They seem safe, blah, blah, blah. And we actually saw a higher rate of adherence to vaccines just from kind of the activation energy, the behavioral activation of going there.
It's a wonderful intervention. It's beautiful because you're leaving the choice in their hands, but you're also putting them in the center. So a lot of
Yes.
people are very pro-vax and they will vaccinate regardless. Some people are anti-vax and they will not vaccinate regardless. And we're seeing that, right? But there are a lot of people in the middle. So when you ask them to sign, I refuse to be vaccinated, they're like, whoa, wait a minute, do I refuse to? I don't know that I refuse. I'm not sure about it, but I'm here already. So we're changing the action from an act of omission, which is, well, I never went, like I didn't deal with vaccination,
Yeah.
to here, well, there's commission either way. There's an act there's an action that I have to take either to get vaccinated or to sign. And you're forcing that upon them. That's fine. You're forcing them to choose. That's the essence of freedom, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get to
Mm-hmm.
choose. And that moves the needle. And that's really beautiful.
Absolutely. Oh, I love it. So, okay, there's a million things I could talk to you about. I could make this a 5-hour podcast. I can't keep you much longer. Obviously, we didn't get into the nitty gritty, the brass tacks of, every decision and what sort of cognitive, like what sort of tools and tricks we can use when we make those decisions. But that's the whole point of the book, right? So I don't want to spoil it. I want people to buy the dang book, and learn about themselves, learn about some of these options that they have when navigating the system. But two things come up for me here before we wrap up. I always close with the same two questions, which we'll get to in just a second. But I did make a note. I made a note, and I want to come back to it. And I'm curious your opinion because I'm not sure if this is actually covered in the book. So I remember speaking with one of my supervisors when I first started working in the cancer center and talking about patient decision making. And I remember him saying that, historically we had a paternalistic model in medicine. The doctor would say, this is what you're going to do. And you would say, sure thing. And it was even worse than that because basically the woman would get the exam and then literally the doctor would go talk to her husband and tell her husband and she was like completely in the dark. And culturally, sometimes that's still what people want. Culturally, sometimes people say, we don't want to tell grandma about X and Y. It's our culture. We don't let them know, and great. Like when we take all these calculations in. But then his view was we've swung the pendulum so far away from paternalism that very often you'll see almost an extreme example, not very often, sometimes you'll see almost an extreme opposite example where a physician will say, well, you can do this, 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 this. What do you choose? And the patient's like, I don't know what to choose. You're my doctor. Like, you tell me what to choose. And so it's like, how do we find that center point? Of course, we want patient advocacy. Of course, we want patients to be fully informed and to be able to make their own decisions, but they have to be informed to make those decisions.
They do. They most certainly do. So I couldn't agree more with your supervisor. In fact, I wrote about it. I wrote an article for the Wall Street Journal about this very point, about the fact that not everyone can decide all the time. And there were hundreds of comments, letters to the editor. Some people were very angry, saying, what do you mean I can't decide? Of course, I'm superhuman. I can always decide. And others said, that's very true. So I think patients should be able to decide. And there are two major shoulds here. The first should is they should be able to decide based on information that they understand.
Right. Not just that they have the information, but that they get it. Like
Yes,
they've been able, it's been interpreted.
exactly. That it's
Yeah.
been served to them in a way that they can understand. And that's the first thing. And then they can decide whatever they want. And the second should is patients should be able to decide how much involvement they want to have in the decision-making process, which goes all the way from waving the doctor off and saying, I read the recent papers in the New England Journal of Medicine and I know what I
Right.
want, to saying, you know what, doc, I don't want to decide. You choose for me. And in fact, there's a really beautiful TED Talk by a marketing professor from Stanford who should be able to make every decision in the world, right? And he
Right.
says
Yeah.
that when his wife got breast cancer, him and her decided to take a back seat. They said the doctors will focus on decision making, we will focus on getting better. And that was their choice. And it's incredibly legitimate. Who can say, no, we demand that you decide? He decided. They decided. They said, we're not choosing. And that's fine. That's absolutely true. So in the Wall Street Journal article, I wrote that sometimes people are just dumped with the choice. It's like abandonment masquerading as empowerment. Say, you choose.
Yes.
It's
Yeah. You'd
it's not
figure it out. Get
real.
back to me. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How are you going to figure it out if your doctor doesn't explain? It's pretty scary now, right? You're going to go on Facebook. You're going to go on
Oh gosh.
quackdoc.com. I don't know
Yeah.
where you're going to
Yeah.
go.
And that's something.
Buy miracle cure dot whatever. It's frightening. So we
And
do
that's
need
something we
help.
never even had the opportunity to get into. Luckily, my listeners know what a skeptic I am and know that this is a place where I sort of like wave a flag quite often, is the fear and the risk of turning away from established medicine and into pseudoscience. There's a legitimate risk here that we have to work to prevent because once we get out of the realm of evidence-based medicine, once we get out of the realm of areas where either we're actively doing research or we've already done the research and shown without a shadow of the doubt that the thing doesn't work, that's a scary proposition. But we are forcing people into that when we don't give them the time, we don't give them the care, and we don't show them the sort of options that they have that very often a pseudoscientific practitioner, a quack, will offer a
Of
patient.
course. Of course.
Yeah.
And that's so tempting. It's wonderful. It's like wonderfully tempting. But when it sounds so clear and simple and certain, that's when you should know this isn't real medicine, because real medicine
Right.
is is just not like that. Like, it's no coincidence that when Pfizer came up with the COVID vaccine, they didn't say this vaccine will protect everybody from COVID. No, no, they were giving these percentages. Why? Because that's science.
Exactly. Yeah. And they also didn't say the one thing your doctor doesn't want you to know, or like healthcare
Yes,
providers don't want to tell you the secret. It's like,
exactly,
yeah, if that
exactly.
existed, we would all be using it. Trust me.
We would.
So,
Yeah.
sort of obviously your book, I'm so excited that you spent this time to share. And before we sort of like review here, I do want to bring up a handful of things that came up for me throughout this talk um, that if you haven't come across them, or probably you're well aware of them, but one of the things that I often utilize, a wonderful tool that I utilize with patients, comes from the Conversation Project. And
Yes,
it is it's
I wrote
they're
about it.
oh, love it, love it, love it. Yeah, there's so many guides that they offer to help you ask yourself those questions. How do I want to engage? How much do I want to know? What is, it's sort of the pre-step before doing the advanced directive, before doing the living will, before grappling with the big picture questions. It can help get you ready to grapple with those bigger questions like who's your healthcare proxy. I also highly recommend Atul Gawande's Being Mortal, because I think some of these, obviously in the most extreme version, in the end of life version, some of these topics are recapitulated. But your book, Your Life Depends on It, what you can do to make better choices about your health. It's not just about death. It's about life. It's about everything from taking a Tylenol to deciding whether or not you want to have that preventive mastectomy. And goodness, are we faced daily with these medical decisions? And shouldn't we be empowered to be able to make them intelligently, and and by the way, not only listen to our cognitions and grapple with our thoughts, but also with our feelings, because our feelings do matter.
They really do. And I think I wrote more here about my point of departure was really cognition, but I also deal with how overwhelmed people are and how scared they are and why they resort to all these magical cures because they're scared, because they need the certainty, etc. Definitely, our emotions play a large role. So it's super important to read. It's not like, oh, I'll read it when I'm sick. No, just read it because you're smart. Just read it because you
Yes.
want to know how the world works. This is part of the world, and may you never use it, but you probably will. You
Absolutely.
know?
Yeah, it's so true. Gosh. Well, Talia, thank you so much for spending your time with us. Oh, I forgot. I forgot to ask you the final two questions. Can I keep you
Yeah,
for like 2 more minutes?
of course.
Oh, yay. Okay. So when I ask every guest who comes on the show these two questions, because I've been so lucky that over, gosh, let me see. I'm just gonna check my website real quick.
Your
Over
numerator.
the Yes, over the past, oh, it doesn't even say, 360 some odd. I mean, 7 years, maybe 8 years I'm coming up on. It's bananas. Yeah, you will be episode actually. Ooh, it's loading, it's loading. Why so slow? You will be episode 300 and 388, no, 87. Oh my gosh. Okay. So
Wow.
after that
Wow.
many guests, who all come from different walks of life and who focus on different aspects of science, I'm always amazed by the diversity of answers, and sometimes by the similarities in their answers. So here they are. They're big picture questions, but I know you're a big picture thinker. Number one, when you think about the future, in whatever context is relevant to you. So we mentioned before, everything from the cosmos to your own personal life, anything in between. Number one, what is the thing that is keeping you up the most at night? The thing that you're worried about, concerned about? Maybe you're tending on a little bit of cynicism or pessimism. Where are you truly concerned? And then on the flip side of that, from an authentic, place, where are you finding your hope, your optimism? What are you looking forward to?
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Big.
Yeah. Yeah.
Take all the
Big.
time you need.
Could you go any bigger, please?
Right.
With the future, I guess it's the big picture questions, like with the planet and also with my family. Just, will I do good by them? Will things work out for everyone economically? When I think of the future, really the truth is I worry about health. So I worry I don't even have grandkids yet, but I hope that they're healthy when they're born. I think health is a miracle. It's just, it really is. I used to give talks to urology nurses. They were amazing ladies. Um, and they talk about urology department, and it's like, wow, these are people who can't pee. Can you imagine? Can you imagine that being a huge thing you have to deal with? So health really is a miracle, and that's something that keeps me up at night, I guess, more than the planet, etc., because it's more tangible to me. And when you ask about what keeps me going, that's my crazy innate optimism, which is like there, and really love. Love just very nourishes me. I think love is a miracle too. With my kids, with my husband, with my mom, who's a real sweet lady. She's over 90. Um, and she's cute and she's loving and it's wonderful. That's just beautiful. Thank God, like it's replenishing. And with my really good friends. So that's something that's worth living for. It's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, people sometimes say the small things in life. I can't say that being with my daughter and, laughing our heads off with a Melissa McCarthy movie. We were just watching The Boss. I don't get royalties for that. It was so vulgar
She's so
and
funny.
wonderfully funny, like crazy. My husband was like, "What are you watching? I'm like, get out of here. We're having fun, right?" So is that small to be sitting with your daughter on the couch, laughing your head off? I think that's huge. That's
That's
huge.
everything. Yeah.
Exactly. So these are the things that keep me going because they're just small miracles. They are, or not even small. They're miracles. So appreciating such miracles is wonderful. It's very replenishing. So that's your answer to your really, really big and wonderful questions.
Well, your answers are after my own heart. Very existential of you. I absolutely love it. Everyone, the book is Your Life Depends on It, What You Can Do to Make Better Choices About Your Health by Dr. Talya Miron-Shatz. Talya, thank you so much for being here with us today. It was a joy. Honestly, an absolute joy.
Same here, Cara. Really.
And everybody listening, thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.